When people say a woman changed suddenly after 40, what they really mean is that they finally noticed. Because nothing about this change is sudden. It's slow, silent, and invisible for years. It's built from swallowed words, delayed dreams, ignored exhaustion, and emotional labor that no one ever counted. And then one day, the tolerance runs out. Not because she became bitter, but because she became honest with herself. A woman in her 20s hopes. In her 30s, she compromises. By 40, she calculates the cost of staying the same. That's the shift people find threatening. Not age, awareness. For decades, she was taught to be agreeable, to be patient, to be the glue that holds relationships together, to adjust, to sacrifice quietly and call it love. She learned early that harmony mattered more than her own comfort, that being liked was safer than being respected. So she carried marriages, families, emotions, schedules, and everyone's mental load on her back, smiling through it because that's what a good woman does. But the body keeps receipts, so does the mind. By 40, a woman has lived enough life to know which promises were empty, which apologies were manipulative, and which patterns will never change, no matter how many chances she gives. She has repeated the same conversations. She has waited after expressing her needs only to watch them be ignored again. She has explained herself gently, then firmly, then with tears, and when none of it worked, she went quiet. That silence isn't peace, it's preparation. This is where men often get confused. They say she changed. No, she stopped performing. She stops laughing at jokes that disrespect her. She stops smoothing over tension she didn't create. She stops mothering grown adults. She stops begging for emotional availability. Not because she doesn't care, but because she finally understands that love without reciprocity is self-abandonment. At 40, time becomes loud. Mortality becomes real. She no longer believes she has infinite years to wait for someone to grow up, to choose her, to show up properly. And once time feels finite, tolerance disappears. You stop negotiating with behaviors that drain you. You stop investing in people who only take. This is also the age where identity shifts. For years, her worth was measured by what she gave: her youth, her beauty, her fertility, her patience, her forgiveness. After 40, she asks a dangerous question: who am I when I stop giving everything away? And that question terrifies people who benefited from her silence. Emotionally, she becomes sharper. She sees through half-truths. She recognizes gaslighting instantly. She no longer argues to be understood. She observes to decide. That's why conversations change. She listens more, reacts less, and leaves faster. Not impulsively, strategically. Sexually, she changes too, and this part makes society deeply uncomfortable because she no longer performs desire to be chosen. She knows what she wants, what her body responds to, and what intimacy actually means to her. She's less willing to accept selfish lovers, rushed connections, or emotional emptiness disguised as passion. Desire becomes selective, not desperate, and that confidence is often misread as coldness. In marriage, this shift is seismic. If a marriage was built on imbalance, where she carried the emotional weight while he enjoyed comfort, this is the age where cracks become visible. She stops reminding, stops managing, stops compensating. And when she pulls back, the relationship feels like it's collapsing because for the first time, it's no longer being carried by one person alone. Men often say, "She's not the woman I married." That's true because the woman you married hadn't yet met herself. She was still trying to be everything you needed. Now she's trying to be someone she can live with. There's also grief here, a quiet mourning for the version of herself that gave too much, stayed too long, forgave too easily. She looks back and realizes how much energy went into keeping peace instead of building joy. That grief hardens into boundaries, and boundaries feel like rejection to people who are never willing to respect limits. This is why arguments after 40 feel different. She's no longer fighting to win. She's evaluating whether this connection deserves any more of her life. Her tone is calmer, but the stakes are higher, because once she decides she's done long before she announces it. This isn't rebellion, it's reclamation. Biologically, hormonally, emotionally, everything converges. She becomes less tolerant of stress because her body literally cannot afford it anymore. Chronic stress shows up as fatigue, anxiety, resentment, illness. So she chooses herself not out of selfishness, but survival. And here's the brutal truth. Many marriages don't fail because love disappears. They fail because one partner evolves and the other refuses to. One grows into awareness while the other clings to entitlement. One starts asking for partnership while the other still expects sacrifice. When a woman changes after 40, she isn't asking for perfection, she's asking for presence, for respect, for emotional maturity, for effort that isn't triggered only by the threat of loss. If she becomes distant, it's usually because she spent years being close alone. If she becomes independent, it's because dependence cost her too much. If she becomes quiet, it's because she has already said everything multiple times and finally accepted that understanding can't be forced. This stage of life strips illusions. Romance without responsibility loses its charm. Promises without action sound insulting. Love without safety feels pointless. She no longer wants intensity. She wants consistency, not chemistry, character. And when she doesn't find it, she chooses solitude without fear. Because loneliness in a relationship taught her that being alone is not the worst outcome. This is why women after 40 scare people. They're no longer easy to manipulate. They don't confuse attention with affection. They don't sacrifice peace for validation. And they don't stay where they're merely tolerated instead of cherished. No, she didn't change suddenly. She woke up slowly. And once awake, she refuses to go back to sleep just to make someone else comfortable. She also begins to question the stories she was sold about endurance. That if she just waited long enough, loved hard enough, stayed soft enough, things would eventually balance out. By 40, she has enough evidence to know that effort alone doesn't fix character. Loyalty doesn't cure neglect. Silence doesn't create intimacy. And patience, when one-sided, slowly turns into self-betrayal. This is the age where she stops romanticizing struggle. She no longer confuses chaos with passion or control with care. She has seen how drama ages the face and bitterness settles into the body. So she starts choosing calm, even if it means choosing less. And for people used to her overgiving, less feels like abandonment. Her priorities change because her energy changes. She no longer wants to pour herself into endless arguments, emotional babysitting, or unspoken expectations. She wants clarity, directness, emotional adults. And when those aren't available, she doesn't negotiate with reality. She adapts to it. There's also a shift in how she views respect. Before, she may have accepted crumbs as long as they came wrapped in words. Now, words mean nothing without consistency. She watches patterns instead of promises. She listens to behavior more than explanations. And once she sees who someone really is, she believes it the first time. This is why men often feel blindsided, because they mistake her patience for permanence. They assume her tolerance is infinite. They believe that because she stayed through neglect, she will always stay. What they don't realize is that she was staying while slowly detaching, loving while slowly letting go, hoping while quietly grieving the relationship she wished she had. By the time she changes, she has already accepted the truth internally, The outward shift is just the final step. She also stops competing with other women. She no longer measures herself against youth or novelty. She understands that attention can be bought cheaply, but loyalty is rare. She knows her value isn't in being chosen by everyone, but in being chosen correctly. That confidence unsettles people who relied on her insecurity to maintain control. Emotionally, she becomes less reactive and more discerning. She doesn't raise her voice to be heard. She doesn't chase closure. She doesn't demand explanations from people who have shown her who they are. She walks away without theatrics, and that quiet exit is often more devastating than any argument. In long-term relationships, this is where the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. If she was the planner, the communicator, the emotional anchor, she eventually steps back. Not to punish, but to see what happens when she stops holding everything together. And when things fall apart, she learns an important lesson. It was never a partnership. It was her effort carrying the illusion of one. This realization is painful, but it's also freeing, because once she sees it, she can't unsee it. She also becomes more protective of her inner world. She doesn't overshare. She doesn't explain herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She saves her vulnerability for those who have earned it through reliability, not intensity. And if no one qualifies, she keeps her heart guarded without resentment. Her standards rise, not because she thinks she's better than others, but because she knows what it costs her to settle. She has paid that price before, with her health, her joy, her sense of self, and she refuses to pay it again. This phase often gets labeled as cold, selfish, or difficult, but what it really is a woman no longer negotiating her worth. She isn't trying to be easy to love at the expense of loving herself. She understands that being low maintenance often meant being low priority, and she's done with that trade-off. She also stops rescuing, stops fixing, stops believing it's her job to heal someone else's wounds at the expense of her own. She recognizes that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. So she learns to care without carrying, to love without losing herself. And perhaps the hardest part of this transformation is that she becomes okay with being misunderstood. Earlier in life, being seen mattered deeply. Now peace matters more. She no longer corrects false narratives about herself. She lets people think whatever helps them sleep at night, because she's finally sleeping better herself. This is not a midlife crisis. It's a midlife clarity. She has reached an age where pretending costs more than truth, where staying silent hurts more than leaving, where shrinking to fit someone else's comfort feels more exhausting than standing alone. And once a woman reaches that clarity, there is no dramatic confrontation required, no ultimatum needed, no announcement made. Her energy shifts, her availability changes, her tolerance disappears. And the people who benefited from her old self feel the loss before they understand the reason. Because what they're losing isn't her love. It's her willingness to abandon herself for them. She also becomes brutally honest with herself about desire and disappointment. She stops pretending she's satisfied when she's merely surviving. She no longer labels emotional starvation as stability, and she stops accepting the bare minimum simply because it comes from someone familiar. Familiarity loses its power when it stops feeding the soul. This is where many women begin to emotionally detach long before they physically leave. They stay present in routine, but absent in spirit. Not out of manipulation, but exhaustion. They've tried everything they knew how to try, and once effort turns into self-erasure, something inside them shuts down to protect what's left. People often ask why she didn't speak up earlier. The truth is, she did. repeatedly, just not loudly enough for someone who only listens when consequences appear. So by the time her behavior changes, her words are no longer necessary. Her silence has replaced explanation. She also starts choosing depth over performance. She doesn't care to impress rooms anymore. She's uninterested in proving how strong, patient, or forgiving she can be. She wants spaces where she can exhale, where she doesn't have to translate her emotions into something more convenient for others, where she isn't constantly shrinking her needs to avoid conflict. This is also when she redefines love. Love is no longer about sacrifice that drains her. It's about mutual care, emotional safety, and shared responsibility. She understands that love should add to life, not quietly subtract from it. And if it doesn't, she questions why she's there at all. In marriages where growth was ignored, this awakening feels like betrayal, because when she finally chooses herself, it exposes how much of the relationship depended on her self-neglect. And instead of asking how they lost her, many ask why she changed, because that question avoids accountability. She also becomes less afraid of endings. Earlier, endings felt like failure. Now they feel like alignment. She understands that staying in something misaligned doesn't make her loyal. It makes her complicit in her own unhappiness. And once she accepts that, fear loses its grip. Her relationship with control changes too. She stops trying to control outcomes, reactions, or other people's growth. She lets things unfold as they are, not as she hopes they'll become. This acceptance is often mistaken for indifference, but it's actually wisdom. She knows now that forcing change is a losing game. There's also a noticeable shift in how she handles conflict. She no longer engages in endless emotional debates. She states her boundary once clearly, and if it's crossed, she acts. No dramatic speeches, no threats, just consequences. This calm decisiveness is what shocks people the most. She also learns that being needed is not the same as being valued. For years, she may have been indispensable, handling logistics, emotions, crises, but indispensability didn't translate into appreciation or respect. So she stops building her identity around usefulness and starts building it around authenticity. Her circle changes. She tolerates fewer people. She invests in fewer connections, but the ones she keeps are real. She no longer has the energy for relationships that require her to constantly explain, justify, or overextend. Peace becomes her filter. And with that peace comes a new kind of strength. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmovable. She doesn't react to guilt trips. She doesn't collapse under blame. She doesn't chase reassurance. She trusts her judgment because it's been sharpened by years of experience and disappointment. This is why attempts to pull her back with temporary effort often fail. Grand gestures don't impress her anymore. Promises made under pressure feel hollow. She's looking for sustained change, not panic-driven performance. And if she doesn't see it, she keeps moving forward, quietly. She also stops arguing about reality. She no longer debates facts that are clear. She doesn't try to convince someone to see her worth. She understands that if someone wanted to understand, they would have by now. So she saves her breath and uses it to build a life that feels lighter. What looks like emotional distance is actually emotional maturity. What looks like detachment is discernment. What looks like sudden change is the final stage of a process that started years ago. And the hardest truth for those left behind is this: when a woman changes after 40, it's rarely because she stopped loving. It's because she finally stopped hoping that love alone would be enough. So understand this clearly. When a woman reaches this point, there is no argument left that can bring her back to who she was. No reminder of history, no appeal to guilt, no sudden affection meant to rewrite years of neglect. Because she is no longer reacting from emotion, she is acting from clarity. This version of her is not angry. She is awake. She has measured the cost of staying, the cost of leaving, and the cost of losing herself. and she chose the only option that didn't require self-destruction. She didn't harden her heart, she protected it. She didn't become selfish, she became selective. She didn't give up on love, she gave up on being the only one fighting for it. If you are with a woman approaching this stage, understand this. She doesn't want grand speeches or temporary change. She wants consistency, presence, respect that doesn't expire when life gets comfortable. Because once she crosses this line, she doesn't look back to negotiate. She looks forward to rebuild. And if you are that woman, know this: you are not broken, bitter, or too much. You are the result of years of growth, survival, and truth. You are allowed to outgrow roles that required your silence. You are allowed to choose peace over performance. You are allowed to walk away without explaining yourself one last time. Because the most dangerous thing is not a woman who raises her voice. It is a woman who has gone quiet, clear, and finally chosen herself.